Everyone ran from the bull, but the one-armed veteran didn't move an inch. The moment the latch broke, the world snapped open like a struck drum. With a bone-shaking crash, the steel gate of the transport trailer swung loose and slammed against the side of the vehicle. A split second later, a low, guttural bellow echoed down the main road of Harrow's Field. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Then came the thudding sound of hooves, heavy, wild, and growing faster. The bull had escaped. A thick cloud of dust erupted as the beast burst out into the street, nostrils flaring, eyes bloodshot with panic and fury. He was massive, easily over a ton, and every muscle under his dark hide pulsed like coiled cable. His name was Redmaw, and the name wasn't just for show. Dried blood still clung to the corners of his mouth from his last illegal fight. The jagged tip of his left horn glinted in the sunlight like a blade. The first scream came from a fruit vendor whose cart was directly in the bull's path. He didn't bother gathering his wares, just turned and bolted into the alley. Crates of apples scattered, tumbling across the ground as the bull stormed through. Behind him, the rest of the market dissolved into chaos. A baker tripped over his own display. A coach driver whipped his horses, trying to turn them around before they spooked. Children wailed. Doors slammed. Someone yelled, "Get inside!" Over and over, but no one listened. All except for one man. He stood dead center in the path of destruction, tall, solid, unmoving, like the last pillar in a crumbling temple. Walter Hobb didn't flinch, didn't shout. He just narrowed his eyes as Redmaw barreled toward him. He wore a weathered leather jacket, the sleeve on the left side pinned neatly above the elbow where his arm ended. His boots were caked with years of dust and grit, and the sun cast a shadow that made him look even broader than he was. He had the calm of a man who had seen worse and survived. Sheriff Tolliver dove behind a nearby horse trough and shouted, "Walter, get out of there!" But Walter didn't answer. He simply lowered his chin, adjusting his stance like a man bracing for a storm. In his right hand was a small metal device, no bigger than a lighter, its single blue light blinking faintly. Redmaw thundered forward. The crowd watched from alleys and doorways, unsure if they were about to witness a miracle or a tragedy. The bull's hooves struck the ground like thunder. He wasn't charging blindly. He was focused, deadly, intelligent in a way only a creature built for violence could be. Walter didn't move. Just before Redmaw reached him, something strange happened. The bull slowed, not by much, but enough for a trained eye to notice. His head twitched slightly. One hoof landed crooked. The beast let out a grunt, confused, as if a mosquito buzzed inside its skull. Walter glanced at the device in his hand, still blinking, still weak. He pressed the button again. Nothing. Behind him, Tolliver saw what was happening. "It's not working," he shouted. Walter gave a slow nod. He already knew. The signal wasn't reaching. Something had gone wrong. The plan was simple. Trigger the ultrasonic chip embedded in the bull's skull. A low-frequency pulse meant to disorient Redmaw, make him pause long enough to be corralled. But now, out in the open, surrounded by too many signals and too much interference, the device had failed. Walter pocketed it. The wind picked up a thin veil of dust around them, brushing against his face. He shifted his weight and took a single step forward. Redmaw saw the movement and exploded back into rage. With a deafening bellow, he reared his head and charged again. Walter didn't move until the last second. Then, with the practiced efficiency of a soldier, he stepped to the side, letting the bull's momentum carry it past him. His metal wrist brace struck Redmaw's flank with a sharp clang, startling the animal. The bull skidded, swerved, turned, and faced him again, eyes now burning with challenge. The townsfolk stared in stunned silence. Not one of them had ever seen anything like it. A man with one arm, standing his ground against a killer. As Redmaw circled, pacing with slow, menacing steps, Walter's eyes swept the surroundings. He wasn't just watching the bull, he was calculating, scanning. The stalls, the crowd, the routes, every angle. A moment later, Deputy Brogan, young, pale, nervous, ran up behind the trough and ducked beside the sheriff. "We've got nets and tranquilizers, but no clear shot," he whispered. "Do we go in?" Tolliver gritted his teeth. "Not yet. He's working something." Brogan peeked over the trough. "Is he crazy?" "No," Tolliver replied. "He's hunting." Walter's eyes locked on the market square ahead, a wider, open space. He began walking backward slowly, facing Redmaw the whole time. The bull followed, hooves clicking against cobblestones, breath heaving from its nostrils in great bursts of steam. People whispered from windows above. Some recorded the scene with shaky hands, others just prayed. And all the while, Walter's mind raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had spent weeks gathering intel, tracking the illegal breeders tied to underground fights in abandoned rail yards and forest clearings. They'd been recruiting ex-military livestock handlers and eliminating those who refused. His younger brother, Samuel, had been one of them. Killed outside a barn with no explanation, no justice. Walter had traced the threads back here, to Stonecross. And he'd planned the trap carefully. A staged breakdown. A transport arranged under false paperwork. A sedative slipped into the bull's food. Everything had been set. Redmaw was supposed to remain in the trailer until Walter gave the signal. But someone had tampered with the trailer's gate, released the bull early, which meant someone on the inside had flipped. He thought of Brogan, too eager. The mayor's assistant, nervous the past few days. The handler who disappeared last night. One of them had betrayed the plan. Walter had no time to figure out who. Not now. Redmaw stomped, then lunged again. Walter dodged left this time, using a pile of broken crates to pivot out of reach. The bull slammed through them, enraged. Shards flew. Dust filled the air. Walter coughed, ducked behind a wagon, and took a breath. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, part of a map of the town. His thumb ran along the inked path, ending at a small circle, the old water tower near the edge of the square. That was Plan B, a trapdoor at the base, reinforced from an earlier renovation project Walter had arranged under a false name. A cage beneath the tank, originally built to hold tools, now emptied. It was small, but big enough to contain Redmaw, if he could be lured inside. The only problem, it wasn't set up yet. It needed a trigger to lock the door from the outside. Walter's brace. He swallowed hard, realizing what that meant. It would only work if he went in with the bull. A crash snapped his attention back. Redmaw had circled and was now behind him, snorting furiously. Walter stood, no more running, no more hesitation. He stepped forward again, locking eyes with the beast. But before he could move farther, someone screamed. Walter turned sharply. Across the square, a boy, no older than 10, had stepped out of an alleyway, barefoot and confused. He clutched a toy wooden horse and stared at the scene, too stunned to move. Redmaw's ears flicked. He turned. Walter's heart dropped. "No," he breathed. The bull pawed the ground. Walter broke into a sprint. And as the first echoing hoofbeats thundered toward the child, Walter shouted at the top of his lungs, voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Hey, over here!" The child turned, eyes wide, frozen. Walter didn't slow. He could already see it. He was going to be too late. The bull was faster. He dropped the map, dropped everything, just ran. Redmaw bore down on the boy, and Walter knew in that instant he had no choice left. No plans, no signals, no backup, just himself, just one chance. He broken trailer wasn't an accident. Walter had set the trap himself, but something had gone wrong. Redmaw had escaped too early, and now Walter had no choice but to face the monster alone. Redmaw lowered his head with terrifying focus, steam rising from his flared nostrils as he scraped at the ground with one heavy hoof. His breath came in short, hot bursts. The muscles along his shoulders rippled beneath torn patches of hide. His tail twitched once, then the monster charged. It was like watching a boulder break loose from a mountain and tumble straight down, gaining speed with every second. Walter stood completely still in the middle of the open plaza. His right hand gripped the small metal device with the dying blue light, thumb already pressed down hard against the button. No change. The chip wasn't responding. It should have flooded Redmaw's inner ear with disorienting noise, a weapon crafted not to injure the bull but to disrupt his senses long enough to bring him down safely. But the signal was lost. Too many buildings, too much steel, too many unknowns. The failsafe was gone. Walter muttered under his breath, "Come on." Still nothing. Redmaw's hooves struck the cobblestones like cannon blasts, kicking up broken fruit and shards of crates left behind in the chaos. He wasn't just fast, he was focused, targeted. And right now, Walter was his target. Walter's breath slowed, heart steady. He watched the bull's shoulders, not the horns. It was the movement of the spine that would give away the final angle of the charge. He had seconds, maybe less. He planted his right foot slightly back. His balance shifted, weight centered. Then, at the very last second, he moved. A step to the left. A pivot. His metal wrist brace clanged hard against Redmaw's side as the beast thundered past him. The touch was deliberate, not to strike, but to confuse. To change Redmaw's perception, to interrupt his rhythm. The bull grunted in frustration, slowed, then turned again. It worked. Walter didn't wait. He turned his back to the bull and started walking, fast, purposeful steps toward the far end of the plaza. He didn't run. He couldn't. If he ran, Redmaw would react on instinct. But if he walked, Redmaw followed. The crowd had all but vanished. Those who hadn't fled were now tucked inside windows or flattened behind barrels. Eyes peeked through shutters. One old man inched his head out from behind a fish cart and whispered, "He's leading it. He's actually leading it." Redmaw's massive head swayed as he followed, snorting, unsure whether to charge again or wait. The pain from the strike had been minor, but the sensation was new. Strange. He wanted to figure it out. Walter led him toward the heart of Stonecross, the old market square. Sheriff Tolliver, crouched low behind a rain barrel, saw what was happening and hissed, "Brogan, now! Get ready!" Brogan, breathing hard, dropped beside him with a net in hand. It was thick, heavy, and reinforced with woven steel rings. Not military grade, but enough to at least slow the bull down. They waited until Walter was clear, or at least far enough ahead. "On my mark," Tolliver whispered. Walter turned slightly as he walked and shouted over his shoulder, "Everyone get clear! Square's about to get crowded!" Redmaw's ears flicked again. The voice kept him focused. Brogan lifted the net. "Now?" "Now," Tolliver ordered. The net flew from their hands, wide and looping toward Redmaw's chest, but a cartwheel, half splintered, half buried, caught the bottom of the net mid-flight. The net jerked, twisted, and collapsed early. It landed harmlessly between the bull's front hooves. Redmaw stomped down on it once, lifted his head, and bellowed. The ground shook. "Missed," Brogan muttered, shrinking back. "Missed bad." Walter didn't look back. He could hear it all. The failure didn't surprise him. He kept moving. Ahead stood the old water tower, 20 feet high, iron frame weathered with rust and time. At its base, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by half-rotted fencing, was a hatch door. A storage space, meant for old tools and filters. But Walter had visited it weeks ago, reinforced the door, tested the locking mechanism, marked it as the backup. That was his new plan. If he could lure Redmaw in, trigger the hatch, and lock it from the outside using the impact switch in his brace, it might just work. Walter muttered to himself, "One shot, one shot." He passed the bakery ruins and stepped around a shattered barrel of dried corn. Redmaw followed behind, not sprinting now but trotting, curious again. The movement of a predator studying new prey. Walter reached the edge of the fence and stopped, 1 foot inside the sagging perimeter. Then he heard a sound he wasn't expecting. Footsteps. Quick, bare, uneven. He turned, and his stomach sank. A teenage boy, maybe 15, emerged from the far side of the square, stepping out from between 2 crumbling walls. He held a carved wooden toy in one hand and looked around, confused. Sweat stuck his shirt to his thin frame. He hadn't escaped like the others. Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. "No, no, no." The boy's eyes locked onto Redmaw. Redmaw froze, and then turned. Walter saw it happen as if in slow motion, the bull's shift in posture, the twitch of the shoulders, the way the head dropped again. He wasn't following Walter anymore. He had a new target. "No," Walter growled, louder this time. "Look at me!" But Redmaw had already charged. The boy froze, legs locked, toy dropping to the ground. His arms flinched up like he wanted to hide inside them. Walter bolted across the square. Each footstep landed like a hammer. The pain in his knee, the strain in his back. He ignored all of it. He knew this feeling. The same split-second moment from combat, when you see a grenade land and have one chance to shield someone. He felt time collapse. "Move!" he shouted. "Kid, move!" But the boy was too scared. Walter didn't slow. He drove forward, faster than he had in years. As Redmaw closed in, Walter dove. His body slammed into the boy, knocking him behind a thick stack of crates left beside an old wagon. Wood cracked. Dust flew. Pain exploded in Walter's side. He landed hard, shoulder first, gasping for air. Redmaw missed the boy by a foot, but caught the edge of Walter's boot as he twisted away. The force spun Walter onto his back. The bull slid, turned, and skidded, furious that its strike hadn't landed. He turned again, already lining up the next charge. Walter coughed, his ribs flaring with fire, but pushed himself upright. He glanced at the boy. "You stay down, you hear me?" he gasped. "Don't move." The boy nodded, eyes wide, face pale. Walter rose slowly. His body ached, but his mind was sharper than ever. He turned back toward the water tower. Redmaw had seen it now, the open space, the darkened doorway, and Walter. He slapped his brace hard. "Come on then," he shouted. "Let's finish this." The bull bellowed, and charged. Walter stepped backward, crossing the threshold of the old fence line. Behind him, the metal hatch stood wide open. He could see the inner floor, reinforced, solid, with a rigged impact lock at the far wall. If he could just get Redmaw inside. He didn't wait for the bull to reach him. He turned and ran into the chamber. Behind him, Redmaw stormed in, blind with fury. Walter reached the back of the room, spun, and slammed his brace against the wall switch. The lock snapped. The hatch door fell shut behind the bull. The lock clicked. Walter collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. He could still hear Redmaw pounding against the walls, screaming in frustration. But he wasn't getting out. Walter looked up, sweat pouring down his face. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear Tolliver shouting orders, people cheering, and the wind blowing dust across the stones. But none of it mattered right now. He turned back toward the crates where the boy still crouched, and as he stood slowly, pulling himself upright with one hand, the thought hit him cold. The plan was never supposed to get this close. But just as he reached the gate, a teenage boy stepped out from an alley across the square, barefoot, holding a toy in one hand. He hadn't escaped with the others. Walter's blood ran cold. Redmaw turned sharply. The boy froze, and then the beast charged again, not toward Walter, but toward the child. Walter moved like lightning. One moment, the bull was charging. The next, the world became a blur of dust, screams, and pounding hooves. Redmaw's monstrous form hurtled toward the small boy who'd frozen mid-step near the edge of the square, his legs trembling, eyes wide with panic. Townsfolk scattered like leaves in a storm, but Walter didn't hesitate. His booted feet pounded the cobblestones as he sprinted straight for the child. The boy never even saw him coming. With a last burst of strength, Walter threw his full weight forward, scooping the child into his left arm and diving behind a stack of crates used for market goods. The crates crashed around them, wooden slats shattering. Walter landed hard on his side. Pain jolted through his ribs like a hammer strike, and for a moment, everything went dark. The boy let out a whimper beside him, but he was alive. Safe. Walter groaned, his breath shallow, chest aching with each inhale. He rolled slightly, keeping himself between the boy and the square. He looked up, vision swimming. Redmaw had skidded to a halt, its hooves gouging deep ruts in the packed earth. The bull turned its massive head in a slow arc, confused by the sudden disappearance of its target. Then its nostrils flared. It raised its head, eyes bloodshot and wide, and it saw the water tower. Walter's heart kicked in his chest. Good. Come on, you brute, remember me. He pushed himself up with a grunt, legs shaky beneath him. Pain knifed through his right side, and the metal brace on his arm felt heavier than it ever had. But he had no time to check the damage. The bull had locked on again, this time with vengeance. Walter slapped his brace against his chest with a sharp clang, metal on metal. The sound rang out like a challenge across the open square. Come on then, he growled through gritted teeth. Let's finish this. Redmaw let out a deep, furious bellow and pawed the ground, its massive bulk tensing. Dust swirled around its hooves. Then, with terrifying force, it lunged. Walter turned and ran, not away, but toward the tower. Each step was fire in his joints. The wind roared in his ears. Behind him, Redmaw thundered like a locomotive, hooves cracking the stones, horns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Walter reached the water tower's base, gripping the side ladder, but he didn't climb. Instead, he twisted around and yanked the small hatch door near the base, a maintenance access that most people didn't even know existed. The hinges groaned, but it opened. He ducked inside, just as the bull caught up. The interior was dark and cool, the curved metal walls amplifying every footstep and breath. Walter didn't stop. He rolled to the side, using the slick floor to his advantage. Just as Redmaw entered the basin with a snort of triumph, Walter kicked the steel hatch from the inside. It slammed shut with a heavy clang that echoed like a gunshot. The bull reared up inside the tank, bashing the walls in blind fury. The entire structure trembled. Walter scrambled to the locking mechanism. He reached for the latch. Click. The internal lock snapped into place, reinforced by his own design weeks earlier. Redmaw was trapped. The beast roared and slammed its head into the wall, over and over, but the metal held. Dents formed. The tower groaned in protest, but it stayed upright. Outside, the town was slowly awakening from its stunned silence. Cautious cheers rose from the edges of the square, tentative at first, then louder. People emerged from behind barrels, doors, and wagons, peeking from windows and rooftops. A few clapped. Some wept. The boy Walter had saved stood shakily beside the crates, his father running across the square to pull him into a desperate hug. But Walter didn't celebrate. He staggered out of the hatch, blood on his lip and dirt on his face, and stood with effort. His shoulder throbbed. His ribs were likely cracked. His left hand trembled from the adrenaline, but his eyes remained focused. He turned and met Deputy Tolliver's gaze across the square. "It's not over," he said, his voice steady, but low. Tolliver frowned. "What do you mean?" Walter didn't answer right away. Instead, he limped toward the edge of the square, where Brogan waited beside a nondescript truck marked with the fake logo of a plumbing company. The deputy reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He didn't say a word, just handed it over. Walter took it, opened it, and scanned the contents. Coordinates, names, a date and time. 2 nights from now. The location, Deep Hollow Forest. Without lifting his head, Walter muttered, How recent? Last night, Brogan replied, voice low. They're moving the second bull soon, bigger than this one. They want it off the books before someone starts asking questions about Redmaw. Walter exhaled slowly, folding the paper and slipping it into the inner pocket of his coat. They bought Redmaw from the same breeder that ran through my brother's unit. Same bloodline. I knew it. You think they'll be there? They'll have to be. Moving a Class 5 bull through backwater roads isn't easy. They'll be there to oversee it themselves. I just flushed them into the open. Brogan glanced around, then leaned in. You sure you're ready for this? You're injured. You should rest. Walter looked toward the sedated bull being loaded into a reinforced trailer by handlers in blue overalls. That thing wasn't the mission. That was bait. A show. Loud enough to rattle cages. He turned toward the warehouse behind the square and walked with stiff but determined strides. Inside, past the empty shelves and broken pallets, was his gear stash, his fallback equipment for exactly this kind of situation. Walter pulled out a black satchel and began packing. A long-range radio, a set of wire cutters, 2 canteens, a stun rod, his old service knife, the grip worn but reliable. He paused, letting his fingers rest on the blade. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about keeping anyone else from going through what his brother had, dragged into a covert testing unit and torn apart by creatures bred for strength, speed, and bloodlust. Redmaw was the tip of a buried spear. As he zipped up the bag, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned. The boy he had saved stood in the doorway. The child's eyes were red from crying, but steady. He held out a small toy soldier, its arm missing. He placed it on a nearby crate and didn't say anything before turning to leave. Walter's throat tightened. He picked up the figure, looked at it for a long moment, and then tucked it into his vest pocket. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. Brogan waited by the truck, already checking fuel and maps. Walter joined him, strapping the satchel over his shoulder. 2 nights, Walter said. Brogan nodded. I'll be ready. As the engine started and the truck pulled away from the square, the streets fell silent again. The cheering had faded. The cameras were gone. But Walter's war wasn't over. The real enemy hadn't shown their face yet. He looked out the window one last time as they rolled past the crate where the boy had stood. The child had no idea how close he'd come to death. Walter ruffled his hair gently and said nothing. But inside, a new vow had formed. He would not allow the same people who destroyed his brother to destroy anyone else. 3 months later, the town of Stonecross looked the same on the surface, but if you stood still long enough, you could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just the rebuilt fences or the newly painted water tower. It was the way people walked, less with suspicion, more with purpose. Yet the silence left in the wake of the incident at Hollow Creek still hung like smoke after a fire. That silence broke one morning when Sheriff Tolliver entered the mayor's office holding a leather folder. Inside were files, photographs, bank records, and one contract, signed in haste by the former mayor himself. The breeding syndicate had paid him off, monthly. His job had been to suppress local panic, silence reports, and quietly reroute confiscated livestock. A signature here, a small rezoning permit there. It all pointed to a long game that stretched beyond Stonecross's borders. Tolliver dropped the folder on the mayor's desk. You either resign, he said in a voice that carried no hesitation, or I drag this downtown myself. The mayor, a round-faced man who had always spoken too quickly, offered no resistance. His hands trembled as he stood, stammering an excuse no one would remember. By noon, his nameplate was gone. Brogan watched the scene from the hallway. He didn't speak, just stared at the closed door with quiet intensity. At only 26, he had been thrust into the limelight by a moment of instinct. No one laughed at him anymore. When Tolliver handed him the badge of acting sheriff, it was without ceremony, but with respect. You've got a good read on people, Tolliver said. You stood your ground when others bolted. That matters. Brogan nodded, holding the cold metal in his hand, the weight of it far heavier than he expected. Meanwhile, Redmaw was alive, something few had expected. The bull, once a weapon of chaos, now stood in a reinforced, climate-controlled enclosure within a remote facility in the Dust Pine Hills. It was officially listed under Project Guardian, but only a handful of men knew what that actually meant. The same ultrasonic chip that once malfunctioned had now been properly recalibrated. Instead of driving him mad, it stabilized his responses. Redmaw no longer snorted at every sound. He no longer clawed at walls or rammed steel doors. He stood calmly, his massive frame still powerful, but his eyes, deep pools of red gold, held less fury now, only curiosity. Hard to believe that's the same beast, said Dr. Kellum, one of the behavioral specialists. He tapped his pen against the glass. He remembers. I don't know how, but he remembers Walter. Whenever I play a recording of his voice, Redmaw looks up, like he's listening. But Walter himself had vanished. One day after the incident, he was gone. No calls, no letters, no sightings. Brogan checked the visitor logs at the hospital. The only entry was a nurse's note. Patient left in stable condition, discharged against advice. That was it. Rumors flew. Some said he was recruited by a private security firm. Others claimed he went off-grid, chasing the last pieces of the breeding cartel. Tolliver had even received a call from a man with a deep southern accent asking about a one-armed man with a limp and a stare sharp as flint. Tolliver played dumb, of course, but something in his gut told him the call wasn't random. Then, one rainy afternoon, a dusty envelope arrived at the town hall. No stamp, no return address. Just the word Stonecross scrawled across the front. Inside was a photograph, weather-beaten, slightly curled. It showed Walter standing on a high mountain ledge, wind tugging at his jacket. His expression was unreadable, but the scars on his face told the truth of where he'd been. Beside him stood another bull, not Redmaw. This one had calmer eyes but bore the same branded scars along its flank. It was unmistakably bred from the same twisted program. On the back of the photo, written in black ink with military precision, were the words, "One left. He won't make it to auction." Underneath was a signature, just a single looping line Walter used when he'd filed his old combat reports. No one knew where he was, but everyone understood what it meant. Walter wasn't done. Somewhere out there, another creature like Redmaw was waiting, and he was going to find it before the cartel could weaponize it. The message wasn't a farewell. It was a mission status. Brogan stood in the town square that evening, staring up at the new bronze statue being installed beside the water tower. It showed the exact scene he remembered. Walter standing firm, one arm at his side, the other sleeve pinned, facing down a charging bull. It wasn't just about courage. It was about control, stillness in the face of chaos. The artist had captured the tension perfectly. Beside Brogan stood the boy Walter had saved. Now recovered, he held a small wildflower in his hand. Every week the boy came to the statue and placed a new flower on the stone pedestal. He never missed a visit, not once. Today he glanced up at Brogan and asked, "Will he ever come back?" Brogan didn't answer at first. He looked out at the hills beyond Stonecross, where the clouds always hung low, and the wind whispered secrets only a few dared chase. "Maybe not here," he finally said, "but I think he's still watching." The boy placed the flower at the statue's base. He didn't remember Walter's face very clearly, just the silhouette of a man who didn't run. And when other children gathered near and asked why the statue stood there, why a bull stood frozen beside a one-armed man, he answered with the same words every time. Because sometimes, the strongest men are the ones who never run,